Killer Innovations Podcast for Monday, September 12th, 2005, show number 27, coming to you from lovely Amsterdam. Hello, and welcome to the Killer Innovations Podcast. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. Before we get started, please keep in mind that the information and opinions expressed in this podcast are mine and mine alone, and do not necessarily reflect those of my past, current, or future employers. Well, as I said in the intro, I am in Amsterdam. I'm here at the IBC, the International Broadcasters Convention this week, and then we'll be heading off on Tuesday for Venice, Italy, to present at a conference there, and then back to the U.S. I had a chance to meet with Richard Donovan and his wife. They are new listeners. In fact, it was kind of funny. Richard just started listening at show number 25, which I think was the first show that I had mentioned that I was going to be here in Amsterdam this week. And him and his wife live here in Amsterdam. They actually came by the IBC show, and we were able to meet up and spent a little time. That was great. I always enjoy having an opportunity to meet the listeners, and it was a really good chat. In fact, the conversation that Richard and I were having with his wife about innovation and where you get ideas from actually will be what we will cover in segment 1. So you can thank Richard for the idea for the topic for this week's podcast. At the end of the podcast, I'll play a new message that just came in on the feedback line. So please keep in mind that if you have feedback or comments or suggestions or criticisms, feel free to either send me an email, or if you want to hear your feedback played on the podcast, just call the feedback line, area code 1-703-636-4460. If you're outside the U.S., that's +1 703 636 4460, or you can always drop me an email at podcast@killerinnovations.com, or Skype at Phil_McKinney. So in this week's segment number 1, this is based on the conversation that Richard and I had at on the show floor a couple of days ago, and the question came up about customers as a source of ideas. Now, in some of the earlier podcasts, I shared, at least in a cursory manner, at least my opinion, that customers in many cases are not a very good source of ideas. So this week I wanted to go into a little more detail specifically about that and talk about, though, how you can use customers and both current customers, non-customers, different market segments as a source. But first off, why do I think that customers are typically not a good source of ideas? Well, one, they don't know your capabilities as well as you do. It doesn't occur to your audience or to your customer base that you may be able to help them solve a problem beyond anything that's beyond just a make it faster, make it bigger, make it smaller, make it prettier. So they really don't understand what your capabilities are, or what your capabilities of the industry that you're in, beyond just simply, what's next. Also, number 2, current customers' creativity is more likely to be focused on their jobs, not your products or services. So, in your case, you're listening to this podcast and reading books and etc., looking for creativity, new ideas, that new thing that's going to redefine your personal wealth, your position in your company. Same way your customer base is focused on their job, their creativity and their focus of innovation is not going to be on your product or service. It's going to be on their job. And 3, few customers have really a strategic view of your marketplace. They're not following your competitors. They're not following the dynamics of the international economy that may be impacting your product or service. Again, they're focused on their business. And 4, people I have found are much better at reacting to a specific prototype, much more so than they are coming up with the insights on their own. So I think it was on the August 21st podcast, we talked about fast prototyping, and that's really where that idea came from. Can you come up with something that you can put in front of the customer that you can at least use to solicit feedback, rather than just going out there with a blank piece of paper and trying to get the customer to come up with their own insight. The other thing is in many cases people will try to do surveys or issue survey results, and I just have not found doing kind of cold surveying to be again a great source of ideas. Why? When you really get down to doing a face-to-face interview with people after they've done a survey, you find that in many cases it's actually tempting for them to lie during the interviewing process. Do you like my product? Do you think it's going to be successful? Would you buy this if it were available? I've just found it to be very tempting for the people in those kinds of surveys to basically lie, because what it is they don't want to hurt your feelings. It's human nature to want to be liked. And if by being direct, potentially brutally honest to where you maybe something you don't want to hear, people don't want to do that. In so many cases, we get survey results back on people saying, yeah, I really like this, and if you make it available, I'll definitely buy it. They're basically parroting back what they think you want to hear. And to be quite honest, what they're parroting back is what they would want to hear had they come up with an idea and were attempting to try to get some feedback. I mean, talking about surveys, you need to be very careful about how you ask or what you ask the users. I mean, we've all been there, the proverbial question, do you like my product? People are typically going to say, oh yeah, it's a great product. And then, the next follow-on question is, are there any features you don't like or you'd want to add to this? Oh, no, everything's great. It's a great product. And then what happens? You go off and you ship it, nobody buys it. This gets back to why we are focused on killer questions. You need to ask that question that forces them to think beyond the obvious. Do you like features, or, what's hard or what's easy? You need to be more specific about the kind of question that you ask in the survey. Okay? So now I've talked about why they're not a good idea. Let me flip it and say, how do you use customers and potential customers of your product as a source of ideas? So first off, find out who the lead users of your product really are. Now, I'm being, polite here, but what I really mean by lead is I'm talking about the guys that are really, really demanding. These are the people that are typically the real pains. The ones that have got, 25 ideas. They're calling your help desk all the time. They are the ones that are always coming into your store. It's that customer that, once you've got them as a customer, they are always around. They're always have an opinion. Now, sometimes it's hard to get beyond, filtering out what's, a good idea or a bad idea, but they tend to be a good source of at least honest and brutal feedback on your products or services. Next is talk to the troublesome customers. These are the ones that are always the ones that are calling in with problems. This doesn't work. This isn't working the way I think it should work. Any kind of, the customers that have repeated calls into your support or are constantly calling your sales reps. Next, find and talk to the interesting or peripheral customers. Find the users who are not in your typical customer segment, let's say. Maybe you sell drilling equipment, which actually we have some listeners who actually are in the drilling industry. Maybe you're selling drilling equipment to one specific type of customer. Do a scan of your customer base and find out if there's any customers who are doing something that are not part of the normal segment. So find those peripheral customers who are doing those interesting things with the product. And find and talk to the non-customers, customers who you think should be using your product but aren't, and ask them why. And then the other is study the novice customers. Who's the newest customer that you've got for your product or service? At least in the computer industry and in the software industry, and even in the telecommunications industry, what we typically do is we'll go to the retail store, someone will buy a new product, and you follow them home. Not like a stalker thing where you're gonna, it does get to be a little bit challenging because you walk up to somebody that's buying your product or your service in a retail store and you say, hey, can I follow you home? But it's actually a good way to observe them using your product, have them open the box. You're not there to say anything. You may videotape, you may take some photographs, but you're there to see how easy or how they interact with your product or service. So it shouldn't matter whether you're selling a retail product or you're selling, big drilling rigs. Who's the new novice customer that just bought your product? And go observe them. See how they use it, fresh out, brand new, because it'll be a great source of ideas for how you could potentially improve the product. Now, a lot of this material that I just talked about is material that we've covered in earlier podcasts. But what I want to talk about now with regards to sources of ideas coming from your customers is a kind of a market research, I should say capabilities, methodology, I guess would be a better word, called ethnography. And ethnography is basically a methodology for studying the customer in relation to their environment. And basically what it is as a researcher or someone trying to identify a product or feature, spending time in the field observing customers and the environment. And basically you're trying to obtain really a deep understanding of the lifestyles or cultures, really as a basis for understanding their needs and problems. If you're designing, for instance, products or technologies for the high growth emerging market areas that we call BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, China, you sure as heck can't do that by sitting in Washington, D.C. You need to get out into the field. You need to immerse yourself in their cultures. You need to immerse themselves in what their day-to-day tasks and what their basically their culture is all about, how they go day-to-day. And this isn't limited to, foreign emerging markets. You can apply really the same approach to sub-demographics in the geography you're in. This is one of the reasons why in my job that I have as my day job that really pays the salary so I can have the fun of putting out this podcast, I spend so much time on the road. I spend 95% of the time, on the road, 3/4 of that outside of the U.S., and all of that time is really out in front of customers, seeing, what their needs are, seeing where the market's going, looking for those kinds of new emerging trends. So ethnography is basically this concept of literally going out and immersing yourself into that culture or target area that you're thinking about trying to come up with a new idea or that new killer innovation. In some cases, you may hear this referred to as empathic design. Empathic design is really a heavy observation, kind of a mode to come up with those new ideas. In the case of ethnography, you're finding a lot of companies are hiring anthropologists because the anthropologists understand how to look at cultures, look at demographic groups, understand cultural norms, those kinds of things. So you're finding that, for those of you who either did graduate with an anthropology major or who know somebody who was thinking about majoring in anthropology, or if you're doing, for instance, I know we have a number of listeners in the podcast that are college students, a lot for some reason in the industrial design space. If you have a chance to take an anthropology course or a couple, take them. It's a great way to teach you observation skills from the standpoint of understanding cultural groups and those becoming a great source of ideas for those killer innovations. So, how do you potentially, as a non-trained anthropologist, how do you go about applying ethnography to coming up with the new killer ideas? First off, you need to develop a holistic view of the customer needs. So to do that, look at all of the behaviors associated with a particular need. Not a simple task, but looking at kind of all the behaviors around any kind of a potential need. And you quickly figure out that whether that be social networks, so people of a certain social class, social network, people that have a certain socioeconomic category, whether that be high income, middle income, lower income, all have certain tasks or certain capabilities. For instance, lower income. What's their issues of transportation? Let's say you're a car designer. The needs of that category of people is clearly different than high income. Or middle income, young families needs for automobiles is different than the over 50 crowd for automobiles. So what are the behaviors associated with a particular need, say automobile? Not a specific task of driving, but a particular need such as transportation. And include all the activities that surround this offering. And then next, what you want to do is you want to expose and record what I refer to as tribal knowledge. And I use the term tribal knowledge, basically to define this social group, this demographic, whether you do this by social network or you do it by some geography. So everybody in the U.S. or everybody in Amsterdam or everybody in Russia, or some kind of other socio-demographic segmentation. And what you want to do is that you want to find out those things that people do automatically, that they don't consciously think about. So going back to the automobile example, I'm a lower income person. I need transportation to get to work. I don't think about it. I just ride the bus every day. But maybe I need to transfer the bus 3 times to get to my office. So through ethnography, you may be observing that there's more than one person who's constantly has to do multiple transfers. And so these people are taking, to go 15 miles are, taking an hour and a half because of all the bus transfers. So maybe you redesign the bus routes to be more efficient. And so therefore these people who didn't even think it was even possible to change the bus routes, they've just been doing it this way for forever. All of a sudden now, rather than spending an hour on a bus or only spending 20, 25 minutes on the bus, and now they can spend more time with their families. Or they can go to school at night, or whatever the case might be. So you want to find out what I would call this tribal knowledge, which is kind of the accepted norms within these small groups of individuals, whether it be demographics or social networks, however you want to segment your customer base. But you want to find those things that people do automatically. They don't consciously think about. This is one of the reasons why I'm big on using visual triggers. So if you go out to the Killer Innovations community bulletin board, you go out to killerinnovations.com, click on the KI community button, and then click on the weak signals segment. You'll see that I post photos out there, and these are just kind of interesting photos, some that I've taken, some that I found in other places that I think are good visual triggers. It shows, or you can at least observe either in a photograph or a video, things that people do automatically. And you pick up things in these photos that aren't really obvious. So I'll post out to the community board a photo, and I'll just ask people for what they see. What's the observation skills that you have as far as seeing things in these photos that are of potential, could be a trigger for an idea. I just had one up recently on showing a clothesline. It was a picture actually taken in Europe, and it shows clothes hanging on a clothesline. But it was interesting that some of the listeners of the podcast posted comments on the photo where they picked up things that just really weren't obvious. The bicycle and the number of satellite dishes on the roofs of the houses, those kinds of things. But then when you understand or you see those kinds of photos, you can kind of derive this tribal knowledge. What's the norm? What do all the people in this area kind of do that's common amongst everybody else? And then use that information to come up with those new ideas. And then once you've identified kind of these, this tribal knowledge, the things that people just do automatically and they don't consciously really think about, identify the customer frustrations and areas of less than optimal efficiencies. And that's really where innovation comes in. It's finding those frustrations, not the verbalized frustrations, but the frustrations that people live with day in and day out, that that you could potentially create a new kind of product or a new kind of service to eliminate. Now, think of the iPod. What frustration did people get rid of? Well, it really wasn't a frustration, as it was boredom. You're traveling, you're sitting on the bus. In my case, I have is cutting grass. Sitting on my rider mower, cutting grass is like the most boring task in the world. But I can put my iPod in, I can listen to music, and I can therefore enjoy that. The other thing that the iPod frustration was is how hard or how easy was it to get music off of my PC down to my MP3 device. The Apple iPod, does a phenomenal job at literally eliminating that frustration, so people literally consume more music, a la the success for iTunes. So again, in ethnography, you want to develop the holistic view of your customer needs. So you want to look at all of the behaviors associated with the particular need, not just simple tasks, but the need. Not how do I get to work, but about transportation. Then you want to expose and record tribal knowledge. These are the things that people do automatically, things that they don't consciously think about. And I would suggest you record these by taking photographs, taking videos. That way you can go back and you can really analyze the things that are happening at the edge that may not be obvious when you're doing just straight observation. And then third, identify the customer frustrations and areas of less than optimal efficiency, and keep in mind that you may find things that were not related to what you were originally thinking of as a product or an idea. So use this as your discovery method, but keep your eyes open. You may find that killer innovation in an area that you originally had not planned for. Okay, moving on to segment 2, weak signals. This week I want to talk about a trend that's emerging, and actually I wouldn't even call it emerging. It's probably maybe a little bit past what I would call a traditional weak signal, but it's one that I'm pretty passionate about, and that's called life caching. Life caching. So life caching is about this whole area of storytelling, sharing your experiences with your social network, sharing your photos, your videos with your family members, potentially sharing photos with complete strangers. I mean, one example of kind of the emergence of life caching is the result of the success of Flickr and like Snapfish for people doing photo blogging. So after the London bombing, what was happening? People had their camera phones, they were snapping pictures and they were posting them to the web so that literally people could see what was going on in the underground in London even before emergency officials even arrived. So in fact, emergency officials in some cases were using the Flickr photos to help identify, 1, who caused the bombings, 2, the results of the damage, 3, the current conditions in the tunnels before they sent down the rescue workers. The same is occurring in the southern part of the U.S. with Hurricane Katrina. People are taking photos and uploading them, and people then literally are using them as kind of amateur journalists just to report what's going on, but also the federal agencies are using those to identify areas of severe damage from the hurricanes. I mean, the real example in our day-to-day lives about the emergence of life caching is really around blogging, podcasting. I'm sharing in this podcast my experience and lessons learned, both very hard lessons learned in my career about innovation and commercialization of ideas, etc. So this is just one example of the whole concept of live caching. The other is video casting. Um, you know, taking those home movies, maybe editing them down to be 3 to 5 minutes and posting them and letting family members and potential complete strangers listening to it. I mean, live caching is really being enabled by devices that we carry with us. You know, it's the unconscious act of literally whipping out your camera phone, snapping some pictures, and posting them to the blog. I mean, literally for me, I do a little bit of photo blogging as part of some tests in my day-to-day job. And from my Nokia handset, it's one button to click the picture and one button to post it to the blogs, and makes it, very, very easy. I find myself now taking photos of things and using the photo blog really as my to-do list or tickler items to remind me so that I don't forget to either do something or pick up a present for my wife or something else. Some specific evidences of work that's being done in live caching. One, if you haven't seen it, is Microsoft's SenseCam. It's a concept. It's not a product yet, but basically it's a little box that you wear around the chain, around your neck. It literally captures something like 2,000 photos per day. It captures the date, the time, the movement. So as you move, it senses the movement and snaps pictures. The light level, what was the temperature, and literally it's recording everything that you do for a day. It's part of what Microsoft calls their life bits or their lifetime storage concept. How many times do you clean out your hard disk? I have a really hard time getting rid of emails. I probably have kept almost every email that I've ever sent or received for years. So I have this process of archiving them and putting them out onto CDs just in the event that I might need them. Now, I very rarely have ever gone back and looked at them, but you just never know. And so Microsoft has this program called LifeBits, which is really about this whole concept of how do you help people literally manage the storage for a lifetime from the standpoint of, documents, emails, photographs, videos, audio, whatever the case might be. Think about Gmail. Gmail now, they're over, it's a gig, plus it's growing to 2 gig. So now with Gmail, people are literally using their Gmail email boxes as their cache, their life cache, to keep track of everything that you have in order to so you have someplace you can go get it and you don't want to delete it. For those of us in the podcasting community, Adam Curry talks about his Gmail account, which is always full because everybody wants to send him a promo to play on his show so that their podcast can get more subscribers. But he talks about that he never wants to delete it. He always wants to hold on to those every email that he gets. Think about the new memory sticks. I mean, if you walk into some cultures, particularly in Asia Pacific, people are carrying literally the memory sticks right around their necks. And those memory sticks contain everything: their family photos, their personal documents, important presentations. And you can think about it literally as becoming almost the purse of the future. We talked a little bit about ethnography, looking at tribal behaviors. Well, one of the things that is pretty telling is looking in and getting permission to inventory the contents of purses. And you'll find that women who are in kind of the same demographics, same cultures, same socioeconomic carry very similar things in their purses, and they have very specific reasons why they carry those items in their purses. Well, now you're going to have memory sticks. Those memory sticks are going to be literally become the new purses for the 21st century. The other is the emergence of such sites as biowriters.com. It's a site that actually helps you write your biography, to tell your story. So they have writers on there. You can work with them. They literally interview you, and then they literally crank out and write your biography that you can share with your kids and your grandkids. And so literally cash your life down to paper such that after you're gone, future generations can read about your life. Some of the impacts on life caching is also the impact on making that information public, not just private. And you can use that, in our case, looking for ideas. You can go off and you can look for people who have made certain information about themselves public. One of the best sources that I found is the Flickr photo service, now owned by Yahoo. Yahoo bought them some time ago. So in the case of Flickr, you can go to flickr.com/Creative Commons, and then this is all of the photos that people have agreed to make public. And there's probably like 300,000 or 400,000 photos in there. And so you can literally look for photos. Not all of them are tagged, so you may just have to kind of scan through them. But it's kind of interesting about people's lives and what people are willing to publish and make public. But it tends to be really a great source of ideas, and one that I use. And if you visit the Killer Innovations community site, you will see the me using some of those Flickr photos as visual triggers for weak signals during the discussions that we have on the bulletin board. Moving on to segment 3, Killer Question of the Week. Some of the listeners have commented that the wording of many of the killer questions is around existing products, how to improve them, what do people not like about my product, etc. So some guidance here on the killer questions. One is you need to feel free to reword the killer question. Don't think the wording is exactly locked down the way that you have to use it exactly the way that it's given. You can tweak the wording. But again, the focus of a killer question is to force them to the person who's reading the question to get to specific ideas, not just a general response that can be answered by yes or no responses. So the guidelines, if you're going to reword a killer question, is reword to be specific to your industry or your business. The killer questions today, I have them worded fairly generically. Many times, probably 70% of the time, I reword the question to be specific to the industry or the business or the area that we are trying to derive an idea around. So reword it to be specific, and then test the question in a brainstorming session. If the idea quality is low, meaning you've asked the question, but the feedback that you're getting just isn't, the ideas are low quality or just don't rank very high during the ranking process, tweak the word. Change the focus to either be more broad or more specific. What we call porpoising. Porpoises, go up for air and they dive deep. They come back up for air and they dive deep. And so make the question broader, make the question more specific. You'll be surprised by what the impact is by just changing one word will do. So play around with the questions, and then once you've got one that works for your industry and works for your business, jot it down, hold on to it, and that becomes one of the questions then that you use for your ongoing for future brainstorms. So, to show you that some of the killer questions have been worded for new rather than improve, this week's killer question is, why are existing products limited to specialist or niche segments? So again, why are existing products limited to specialists or niche segments? And this is going off and you're trying to find that new idea that you can bring to your industry, or you're an entrepreneur and you're looking for that new idea of which you're going to build a business on. So what are the existing products limited to specialist or niche segments? So what are some products? Well, one that I came up with right off the bat, which is actually based on a previous podcast, is power tools. If you recall from the podcast where we talked about Black & Decker, Black & Decker originally built power tools for the area the aviation industry, I guess it was, for Boeing and Lockheed Martin. Well, I think that time it was just called Lockheed, for building airplanes where they needed these power tools for the workers. And then Black & Decker observed that the workers were taking their tools home, in this case drills, in order to do home improvement. And that's what literally launched the power tool industry for home improvement. Another one is pickup trucks. It used to be that pickup trucks were just used for by farmers or people in the construction industry. Now it's turned into being almost the one of the in vehicles to drive around in. So you see people with trucks with special paint jobs and all the interiors that you would see, in a very high-end Mercedes or BMW. And here it is, a pickup truck that obviously has never seen a day off-road or working in a farm area. Another is a Hummer. The Hummer vehicles were originally developed for the U.S. military. And then they were translated from being that very specific niche segment to now being made available to a broad customer base, assuming the customers can afford to spend that kind of money for a vehicle. Same thing along the military line is camouflage clothes. The camouflage clothes developed for the military has found its way to being popular with the youth markets in certain areas of the world. So again, something that was designed for the niche, going mainstream. And then even here in Amsterdam, been walking the show floor for the International Broadcasters Convention, audio tools that were designed very specifically for very high-end radio stations, etc. Seeing those potentially being reused in a more general sense of podcasting, or using the term that we're using this week for weak signals, life caching. So go look in the niche and segments for products and services that could be of interest to a broader customer base. Again, you can apply this if you're an existing business, go look. Or if you're an entrepreneur looking for that new killer innovation, go look at niche segments and see if there's areas or capabilities that you could potentially translate to a much broader audience. So again, this week's killer question is, why are existing products limited to specialist or niche segments? With that, we're going to wrap up. We're running a little bit long here, so I apologize for that. But thanks for listening. Thanks for hanging in there. Please keep the feedback coming. The regular email flow is great. I really look forward to firing up my PC to see what emails I've gotten as far as feedback and comments and suggestions. We've gotten a number of suggestions that we're working on for some upcoming podcasts based on the feedback. So please feel free to send your ideas, suggestions, and criticisms. It's not always, people want to hear the positive, but as we've said, I'm also interested in hearing you as quote customers of this podcast, your own ideas. So email me at podcast@killerinnovations.com. Call the feedback line, 703-636-4460, or you can always Skype me at Phil_McKinney. Don't forget to vote over at podcastalley.com. Again, your votes are the easiest way to say thanks for the favorite podcast that you listen to. It does take time and energy and effort and resources to produce and make available the podcasts. And voting is just the easiest way for you to say, hey, thanks for the time and energy that you put in. And remember, voting restarts every month. So even though you may have voted in the past, if you have not voted in August, you can vote once per month. And also vote for all of the podcasts that you listen to. Or vote for all the podcasts that you listen to that you like, I guess I would say. So it isn't just limited to one podcast. It's really your way, again, of telling or giving feedback that you like what people are doing and encouraging them to continue to put the effort in. Remember, at the end of the podcast, I'm going to play a new message that I just received into the feedback line. If you want or have feedback, or if you're doing your own podcast and you just want to let me know about your podcast. Feel free to call the feedback line, and I'll play those at the end of the podcasts when they come up. We have one message for this week, so please stay tuned and listen to the most recent message. Again, thanks for listening. If you're not subscribed, get subscribed to this podcast. Stay subscribed and get others to subscribe. And we'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.
Hey, Phil, Kevin Williams from the Middle Management Lobotomy Podcast over at mmlpodcast.libsyn.com. Just wanted to let you know we're thrilled with Killer Innovations. I have shared it with the rest of my team in the office. We've probably added at least a dozen people, if not more, to your subscriber list, and have people checking it out every week. And already have made some gains by talking about the level 1, 2, and 3 innovation concept. The team gets it. They understand the difference between an incremental innovation and a breakthrough innovation. It started some pretty dynamic dialogue for our industry. So it's been a tremendous help for us, and we really appreciate the work and continue to trigger those votes over at Podcast Alley. We'll do what we can to funnel you up the list. And if you check out my podcast, you'll note that over the last several weeks I have tried to promote the daylights out of yours because it's been well worth it. So feel free to stop by, mmlpodcast.libsyn.com. Take care. Bye-bye.